It's the board's responsibility to make sure that the organization they serve has a relevant strategic plan that's up to date and that's being used both by the board and by the leadership team in the organization to actually guide the key decisions that they make day by day.
With the strategic plan, I see our board meetings running a lot more smoothly as we get input from staff or we get updates. We're looking back at the strategic plan and saying, how does this fit with the plan? It's really the first time that I've been on a board where I can see the tactics and the strategy really fit well together.
The one good thing about a strategic planning process, if a board is really engaged in it, is it puts some things on the table that no other process puts on the table. It forces you to ask some questions, if it's done well, that you aren't going to be asking in any other situation, which frankly is maybe why some nonprofit boards want to avoid doing strategic planning.
And then as you get more mature staff people, they want to have a better sense of what's actually happening. And I think for me, the strategic plan served as a way to get the board more engaged as well at that level. We have a governing board. They're not involved in the day-to-day operations, but at the same time, you want them to own as much of the vision as possible. And what's the best way to do that is to put effort into striking something that we can all agree on and then live into.
There's a certain level of the plan that every board, I would say, regardless of how your governance structure is set up, every board is responsible for. I believe they're responsible to make sure that the mission, the vision, and the core values of the organization are affirmed and clearly stated in the strategic plan.
And a part of our work was growing where we were becoming kind of educational experts in the public school context, helping the public school address their gap in education issues, which was demanding that we would, or beginning to demand that we would drop the gospel side of our mission. And our board wrestled with, no, this is too core. Proclamation of the gospel is too core to who we are. Our mission, vision, and values held us to where we needed to go, and our goals then had to be reflective. We couldn't just become an education entity. We couldn't just cater to what the school wanted out of us. We needed to be true to ourselves.
The next step that I believe is the responsibility of every board are the goals that define that strategic future.
Each of our program directors has a work plan that aligns with the strategic plans that lays out their work year. Every month, we sit down and look at, so how are you doing on your work plan? What were your goals for last month? What were your achievements? What were your deliverables? How did you do on that? And quarterly, we revisit and say, are we on track? Are we getting to where we need to be? At our bi-monthly board meetings, we address, are we on track with what we said we were going to do, and how is it impacting us? How are we aligning with our plan?
The more mature a board becomes, the more governance-minded they are, which means they really get less and less and less involved in anything having to do with the management of the organization. They've really done a good job of turning that over. So when it comes to strategic planning, it's very common for them to give the vast majority of the work over to the staff. Now, they may still want to be involved in setting the strategic direction, and that would be my strong recommendation, is that a board never give up that responsibility of at least working with the staff to put those strategic goals together.
Because your board, again, is limited to just governing, ensuring that we are doing things well, we're well resourced, right? And that we're staying on point and on mission, whereas the staff is tasked with actually implementing the vision.
The second one is where's your expertise? Some boards are put together because the members of the board have a lot of experience and expertise in the work that the ministry is doing. Well, if you've got that on the board, then you ought to use it in the strategic planning process. And frankly, there are other boards that don't.
We probably lean more towards staff-led because they're the ones who are dealing with the issues day to day and really grappling with the decisions that need to be made. So typically, it's staff bringing a recommendation to the board. We're working through it together.
A third has to do with the culture of the organization. We know that if you go down and you talk to the people in the trenches, they have a certain expectation of how the board and the leadership team are going to make decisions and communicate. And we like to do a planning process that sort of fits that culture. So if they're used to the board playing kind of a minor role and the executive director and the team playing a major role, that's how they would expect the plan to be put together.
We had this initial 20 people that was board and staff that kind of went away and went through this training and begin to develop a plan that we then asked all of the other members of our staff to own. And there was a little bit of tension of, I'm in the work and yet I wasn't engaged in the planning process. And we had to, the tension between helping people become engaged in the planning process so they can own the work was something that was a real tension for us. We kind of bumped our heads a couple of times in trying to figure out the staff ownership side.
But there's another technique the boards can use that can help a lot, and this is what I call a going out and a coming back process. I might put on my strategic planning committee the heads of the major program areas, and during the process I may ask them to what we call go out and come back and bring feedback on how we're doing.
We can have everybody in the organization, but your key leaders who then go back to their teams and communicate where we are in the process, get feedback, get input, get information, and then that core team helps it continue to shape things as we move forward. And then we have all staff meetings where we can lay everything out and everybody gets an opportunity then to hear, to have input, to reflect on. So again, we have ownership in our processes at every level of the organization.
Which is really a key to strategic planning, by the way, and that's helping communicate it in such a way that every person in your organization sees themselves in that plan. Once a plan is finished and the board has adopted it, and this is not only mission, vision, values, the strategic themes, but it's also the objectives and the action plan. This is the whole strategic plan. Once it's put in place, it's imperative that the board builds into every one of its board meetings a set scheduled report on an update on the strategic plan.
So it's this rhythm of adding a new year every year and then putting the specifics together of an annual objectives and then visiting those annual objectives on a regular time. So our plan actually never hits the shelf.
And so along the way, we are checking how we are doing throughout the year to ensure that it's not just something we work on once, put it on the shelf, and not look at it again for the next year, or in some cases 3 years, but each year we take a good look at where we are, where we're going, and is it still relevant for where we are currently? So that's the main thing, which is why you don't want a static plan, because you have to be sensitive to where things are, what adjustments are being made, and what new things are emerging in your community.
So those are just some tips to think about. When you look at your organization and you ask, how involved should the board be? Ask yourselves those questions. What's our governance structure? What's our culture? What's the most efficient way of doing this? How do we get broad representation to make sure that all the voices are heard? And based on that, you should be able to come up with any of those models of either all the boards involved, a subset of the boards involved, or the board is very minimally involved. The bottom line is end up with a good set of strategic goals, mission, vision, values. That's the board's responsibility.